So happy to have you along once again. We are joined, as always, by Greg Engert, beer director for the neighborhood restaurant group of Food and Wine Sommelier of the Year. The group includes Rustico, 2 locations in Ballston and Alexandria. Also, GBD just opened in DuPont Circle. Greg, it is always good to see you.
Good to see you too.
What do we have on tap this week?
So this week, we're saying pretty local for a brewery that's been around since 2006. They're called AleWerks Brewing Company, and they're from Williamsburg, Virginia, right outside the city, near the outlets, northwest of the city. And they've been making some really solid beers for a long time. And recently, they've just been hitting it out of the park with some special releases. We're going to talk about Cafe Royale right now, but their Bitter Valentine is an Imperial IPA. Comes out a few times a year, very limited production, 22-ounce bottles, some sixtels in certain bars. We always try to get our hands on some, and it is one of the better Imperial IPAs I've had. I think it's definitely on level with, like, you know, as far as local, On the Wings of Armageddon and Bitter Valentine are neck and neck. So if you see Bitter Valentine, make sure to get it. And you know, also talking about beer tourism and visiting breweries and stuff, this is one that's close. Williamsburg is fantastic anyways. You should definitely head down and see Chuck and Jeff down at AleWerks Brewing Company. They make fantastic stuff. We just got in a limited amount of bottles of Cafe Royale. I've seen them in some bottle shops around town as well. And this is an amazing Imperial Stout. But what you're going to notice when we taste this is how restrained it is. Nuanced, hugely flavorful, but not over the top. I think it's only about 8% alcohol, which is on the low end for an Imperial Stout these days. And it starts its life as an Imperial Stout brewed with a lot of coffee, and I mean a lot. So it's about a 30-barrel batch, which is roughly yields about 60 full kegs of beer. And into that batch, during the boil, they're dumping something like 40 pounds of Guatemalan Antiguan coffee.
It's not Folgers.
No. It's expensive.
No slam on Folgers.
Sourced, yeah. So it's kind of pricey Guatemalan coffee from the Antigua region of Guatemala. They're adding 40 pounds in there. That's going to bring out a lot of coffee flavors on the palate. Then once they're done fermenting it, they kind of dry coffee the beer. So it conditions for like a week with 20 more pounds of Guatemalan coffee into the conditioning tanks. So you're looking at about 60 pounds of coffee being put into 60 kegs of beer. So you do the math, about a pound per keg, and it really is amazing. But what's really cool then is that when you have a beer that's that intense, you've put so much flavor into it, sometimes brewers make a mistake, and then they age it in bourbon barrels, and they age it for a really long time in really fresh bourbon barrels, and you kind of lose that coffee nuance. So what they've deliberately done here is they use Virginia Gentleman bourbon barrels, which makes sense, you know, another Virginian product. But it's not the first beer that those barrels have seen. They actually make a bourbon barrel-aged porter at AleWerks Brewing Company that they age in the barrels first because they want that beer to be really, really intensely bourbon barrel-y. For this beer, they just want it to be nuanced. So this only goes into the barrels for about 2 weeks, and those barrels have had a lot of their flavors kind of sucked out already. And so what you find is this beautiful interplay of mild bourbon and mild vanilla and oak with the bold and silky, almost velvety qualities from the coffee stout inside.
Oh, yeah.
Smooth.
That's real nice.
Light on the palate. It's got a clean silk quality to it.
I like that. I think people who watch this should try it. I have to admit, if you put coffee on the label of beer, on a beer bottle label, I generally turn up my nose at it, but this is definitely worth trying.
And what's cool, too, about it is that, you know, we're already kind of getting coffee flavors in the stout itself from the roasted malts employed. Yeah. But then with the bourbon, I think it just balances everything out. The barrels come in and kind of temper the coffee so it's not just like a coffee beer, but at the same time, the coffee's balancing against the bourbon. So even if you're not a bourbon drinker or a coffee drinker or anything like that, I think there's distinct harmony going on here, which is really
I think for me, it's a mental block. I have coffee only in the morning.
Yeah.
And I have beer in the morning and the afternoon.
Only
and
all the
at
time.
night. Yes. Well, what would you pair this with? It seemed like I don't want to just send it off into dessert land exile, but it seems like it would go good with a lot of desserts.
Yeah, I think I love tiramisu. That would be awesome with this. That just that touch of coffee flavor coming through is amazing. It'd be great just with like really great vanilla bean ice cream on its own. Brownies and things like that. Really simple desserts would be phenomenal. But actually, something I was thinking about the other day, it wasn't with this beer, but I had an imperial stout with a pepper steak or like a steak au poivre, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Because you think about grilling on a steak, you get that char. That's awesome with the roasty qualities here. Obviously, the steak is rich enough to stand up to the intensity and the slight bitterness. But I get a kind of peppery roasted note from stout, and that's really great with a pepper sauce. Plus, the pepper sauce is always really kind of unctuous and creamy, and this kind of cuts into that creamy quality as well.
We were talking before our taping a week ago about the state of the craft beer industry, and you were saying that, it's growing. How many opened?
I think the Brewers Association, which is the nonprofit kind of trade organization lobbying organization for the craft brewers, I think they marked just over 400 new openings last year. But that's not just, that's everything. That's production breweries, brew pubs, you name it. And about 40 or so closed.
Still a big net gain.
Huge. When you consider there's only about 2,350 in the country. So if you look at that net gain, it went from about 2,000 to 2,350 after the net gain. So that's a lot. And in the meantime, there's some other good numbers. I mean, we cracked the percentage. Craft beer now accounts for 6.5% of the overall beer market in the United States by volume. It's about 10.2% by dollars because it's a little pricier. But still, that's a very small amount for how much beer is getting consumed. A great sign, though, is that I think in 2011, the industry grew something like 11% by volume, 13% by dollars. 2012, it grew 15% by volume and 17% by dollars. So it's definitely kind of on an exponential rise right now. But then, we were talking about last week when we were mentioning this, talking about Founders. They're up over 50,000 barrels in 2012. They'll probably hit 80,000 this year. They're in an expansion right now or they're just finishing it, where they can do up to 350,000 barrels. Meanwhile, this little brewery in Williamsburg, Virginia is doing 3,500 barrels. But they're carving out their niche. I mean, this beer is outstanding. The Bitter Valentine they make is world class. And so they're going to be okay.
And you told the story about Founders, how they, one of their beers is called Bolt Cutter because they thought they were going to fail. They thought the collection guys were going to come take everything away, and they decided to just say, what the hell, and now here they are today, growing and growing and growing. I mean, the craft beer crowd, if they're anything like me, is a tough crowd. If you're, also, if you're like me, I've been to places where I have a sampler and you're sort of like, wow, there's nothing that really
jumps out at you.
That's a bad sign. No one's not ever. We're all going to fail at certain things,
right? And that's what he said. In the old days, you were just happy to get something that was flavorful, and if you went to a place where you got their sampler or got a pint and it didn't have off flavors, it tasted, like it was proper. Even if it didn't impress you, it had more flavor than a macro beer. But now we're at a point where a lot of the beers that are off have been kind of pushed out. Those breweries have closed and things like that. Brewers and distributors and retailers and consumers are very, very strict about quality now. So better quality beers out there all the time. But the market, frankly, is crowded. There's only so many shelves. There's only so many tap lines. And so you need to, I'm not saying every beer is going to come out of your arsenal is going to be lights out, but there's got to be a couple that really keep you coming back for more, and that is definitely the thing. And there's brewers there's lots of brewers that just kind of pop up and and they just blow you away like Tired Hands in Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia. I mean, Gene up there, every beer he's made has just been like impressive. You know, and there's not many come out like to that incredibly at first.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
when you've got that happening, and then you've got brewers like Founders expanding rapidly, Sierra Nevada, New Belgium, Lagunitas, brewers that have footholds and are continuing to impress with new stuff. And what you wonder where the smaller brewers are going to fit in, or the newer brewers are going to fit in. But even so, to that point, I've seen incredibly market improvement from AleWerks products over the last 7 years. I mean, they've always been quality, but they're just getting a little bit more exciting every day, and they've become a brewery to certainly keep your eye on beyond the local scene, I think.
Okay. We'll talk a bit more next time, if we can, about how long the craft beer industry can sustain that growth you were talking about. If you've got a question for Greg, please email us. That email address is beeroftheweek@WTOP.com. Greg, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Everyone, please always do drink responsibly, and be sure to bring your thirst next time for another Beer of the Week.